3D Zelda, a series of games that mean a lot to me, a series of games I've covered before, but have decided to cover again, this time with gusto. Where did it start, what places did it go, and what does it all mean to us? Strap in for the long haul, we've got a lot to discuss. Before we do, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, OperaGX. Are you bored with your current web browser? Does it hog up all your resources, slowing down your computer? Today, I'd like to show you a more exciting alternative. OperaGX is a web browser built for gamers. You can customize it to your heart's content, and one of my favorites is the GX Boy mod, which you can get on the GX store along with other mods. You can change stuff like the background music, keyboard sounds, sounds for opening and closing tabs, all so that you can make your browser truly your own. I mean, why limit yourself to a boring alternative? Make your web browsing experience not only more exciting, but also more efficient. Just by going into the settings and toggling the GX control feature, you'll be able to limit how much CPU and RAM your browser uses while active, ensuring that you'll be able to game at peak performance. It's an incredibly efficient browser too, with a handy all-purpose clipboard and other exciting features. Open up your web browsing experience with OperaGX by using my link to download it. If you use my link, you can see my last 12 videos on your browser homepage. Head down to the description or pinned comment, and you'll be able to switch up your web browser with virtually zero hassle by importing all of your existing browser's settings. You can do this using the Quick Import tool. It will import your browsing history, bookmarks, and cookies. Thanks again to OperaGX for sponsoring the video. Back to Zelda. What does it mean to grow? How much change is involved? Must you forsake your morals, your beliefs, your entire perspective in order to grow? Is it necessary to become a completely different person? Can you incrementally change, one step at a time, until you arrive at a place where you're happy? We all have our own relationship with growth. Some of us refuse to grow, content with who we are and what we've done. Some of us chase growth like a drug, constantly seeking out our perceived flaws in an effort to quash them. Many of us want to grow, but do we even know how? Why? If you ask me, growth is a natural process for which we have very little control. We are often at the mercy of what life decides to throw at us. We will grow older, we will discover what makes us mortal, and our only recourse is in how we choose to respond. As someone who yearns for growth to an almost unhealthy degree, my videos on the 3D Zelda games are hard to accept. I said and did things that I look back on with scorn, and I simply do not understand how anyone still stomachs anything I made back then. In 2017, I felt like I had something to prove. 2 years into YouTube, and there were convictions I held close to my heart. To be good at reviewing video games, it was necessary to steel my heart. If I didn't look at these games through an objective lens, nobody would take me seriously. Especially at that time, there was a push to look more critically at the media we consumed, to peer deep enough that their flaws would manifest. Through this, I adopted a rather strict approach to script writing, in which no game could ever be a darling. Every game had dirty secrets, and it was my job to expose them. I am not proud of that. I was impatient, petty, and short-sighted. However, that is simply the nature of growth. To no one's surprise, I am not the same person I was 6 years ago. Just as I've already grown, there's a hunger within me for continued growth. I've spent every waking moment of my YouTube career trying to find that path, and I'll probably be on that journey for the rest of my working life. I never quite feel like I know what I'm doing or why anyone finds any value in what I say. Everyone starts somewhere. Everything starts somewhere. My channel didn't start with 3D Zelda, and I suppose Zelda itself didn't start with Ocarina of Time, but it built something, a foundation to work off of for nearly 2 decades. Some look at that foundation as old, tired. They see the new foundation set by Breath of the Wild and wonder how we ever stomached the days of linear progression and companions. I do not. What Ocarina established is, frankly, legendary. So legendary that there's an equivalent group of people who are frustrated that Zelda left these games behind. Was that the right move? What was it we had here? What did Ocarina of Time build? Ocarina of Time was once seen as the apex of gaming. And hey, I'm sure someone out there still believes that. Good on ya. You're valid. All I mean to say is that the passage of time changes all things. Like it or not, we can't travel back to the time where this was the hottest shit on the market. We simply cannot eliminate 25 years of hindsight. It will be there, breathing down our necks. Ocarina seems strangely unconcerned with those consequences, probably because it's a game about the passage of time, what it does to the world, how people react to it, and how we're meant to find the strength to brave that future. Despite it being nearly 25 years old, it is still ironically the strongest coming-of-age video game that has ever existed, one you can relate to at any age that shifts with you. All it had to do was take the structure of A Link to the Past and transform it into something wholly unique. That game made you feel powerless at the beginning, so that your growth throughout the adventure would be even more pronounced. By the time you save Zelda and exit the castle, you already feel like you've proven yourself, yet its structure somewhat arbitrarily dictates that you're still in the tutorial phase. I won't deny that defeating Aghanim and being sent to the Dark World is a cool moment, one that will always stick with me. But what impressed me more was how natural Ocarina made it feel. All it took was a simple change. You start your adventure as a child. You take on smaller challenges. Your view of the world is more juvenile. You fight bats, spiders, and jellyfish. There's definitely still a level of danger involved, but it's limited to giant lizards and overgrown tentacle parasites. It's nothing you can't handle, and along the way, you meet a lot of colorful characters. Talon, the clumsy ranch owner, his cute daughter Malin, the guard who wants a Keaton mask for his son. You get to play shooting gallery games in the castle town. Citizens are dancing in the streets, enjoying the present moment. There's a feeling of safety in this initial phase. The training wheels are still on, as you come to grips with how to use your sword, bombs, and boomerang. You have fairly ordinary tasks. Cleansing the evil from within the Great Deku Tree, Dodongo's Cavern, and Jabu Jabu's belly. Which isn't to say there's no danger. Queen Goma, King Dodongo, and Baronade all pose a significant threat to a child. It's simply that they're all child's play, next to Ganondorf. After all you've accomplished, he swats you away like a gnat. He commands a powerful presence, but not without a cunning mind, tricking Link into opening the doorway to the Sacred Realm. Much like the transition from childhood to adulthood, Link quite suddenly finds himself in a broken world. The future version of Hyrule is a shadow of its former self. The castle has been demolished. Castle Town is overrun by reanimated corpses. The Gorons are trapped inside the Fire Temple. Zora's domain has been completely frozen over. Ganondorf won, and the mountain you have to climb to defeat him is much, much larger than it was as a kid. In this moment, whether you're ready or not, you're thrown into the fire and forced to grow up. You are allowed to travel back whenever you want. If this new world is too terrifying, too overwhelming, you can return to those halcyon days where the skies were bright and the people were nice. It's just that you can't give up your knowledge of what is to come. Your current form is powerless to stop Ganondorf, and a bleak future is on its way. You realize that there's always been a dark side to Hyrule when you travel to the bottom of the well, filled with unholy abominations. That evil had always been there, right under your nose. That childhood innocence you enjoyed was robbed from you by Ganondorf, and you will never get it back. So, forward unto the great unknown it is then. This future doesn't just look harsh. Now you're fighting off fire-breathing dragons, evil specters, giant floating skulls, and armored knights. The medallions you seek are locked away in nearly impenetrable fortresses, cloaked in unspeakable evil. The stakes have risen, and you're up against far more than you were before. Yet, you are more capable. You wield the blade of evil's bane, a sword with more reach and power than your dagger. Your pesky slingshot is upgraded into an accurate bow. Your slow and cumbersome boomerang is upgraded into the efficient and precise hookshot. Slowly but surely, you build an arsenal of magical artifacts and tools. A tunic resistant to the heat, and one which lets you breathe underwater. Boots which let you sink below water, or hover over gaping chasms. With each dungeon you complete using these tools, you'll gain access to new dungeons, all the while raising your vitality, and perhaps even your courage. Growing up, losing innocence, all of it is expected. It is something we all must experience at one point or another. As we age, things become more clear. We gain a better grasp on life and its inner workings. But with that power comes an even greater challenge. No longer are you led by the hand. Your life becomes your own, at a pace no one can ever prepare you for. And that can be quite exhausting, terrifying even. Where does one begin? What are we meant to do? An impossibly tall mountain stands before us, and life asks us to climb. We all have to find the strength within ourselves to reach that peak, lest we're swallowed by the abyss of reminiscence. Yet, even with strength, the footholds don't magically appear. Often you have to go out of your way to find them. I used to be pretty impatient. Some would argue I still am, but I like to think I've mellowed out over the years. I think, as I've gotten older, played more and more games, I've come to realize that I don't particularly like having things handed to me. I'm at a point now where tasks that force me to rack my brain to figure out the answer are a lot more compelling than following a waypoint. If it means I have to sit there for a while and think, at a loss as to what comes next, I welcome it. After all, with Zelda, the journey is far more important than the destination. Ocarina revels in the journey. You don't know where all the dungeons are until you either ask someone or stumble upon one. Much of the time, progression is about unlocking an item, then figuring out how you can use it. To unlock the way to Dodongo's cavern, there are several roadblocks to clear first. Darunia seems to be in a bad mood, and wants a catchy song to cut loose. Nearby, there's a tunnel with rocks, where a Goron comments that they can hear something through it. The Great Deku Tree taught you the various ways you can use fire to solve puzzles. You can light torches and burn spiderwebs, so who says you can't also light bombs conveniently placed on the walls? This aha moment will further train your mind to look for interactions like this. You've been thinking outside the box since the first dungeon, and now it's paying off by unlocking a shortcut from Death Mountain to the Lost Woods. You learn Saria's song here, which you can play for Darunia, who will reward you with the Goron bracelet. Link can then pick up bomb flowers, which can be used to open the way to Dodongo's cavern. You could argue that this is a needlessly convoluted progression. What if the player doesn't connect the dots, lighting the bombs with a lit Deku stick? I suppose in the age of the internet, it's not really a huge deal. They'll just look it up and get slightly pissed off, as I once did many years ago. But I think it's worth letting that frustration be a possibility if the trade-off is the potential for a cool revelation. If you talk to the Goron outside Darunia's room, he'll give you the answer. The Song of the Forest will calm Darunia down. At that point, if you hadn't been clued in already, you might figure out that talking to people, investigating objects, that stuff is pretty helpful. You can use that knowledge to, say, learn that Jabu Jabu likes fish. It makes sense that Link isn't going to know what to do without talking to someone. Navi is there for guidance, but she won't tell you everything, and she only pops up every once in a while for a hint. Ultimately, isn't it more fun to soak everything in, take it all one step at a time, learn more about the world you're exploring? You'd think so, but I didn't always agree. Although it is easy to say this in retrospect, now that I know all of the answers. It's impossible to know whether or not I'd greet these same challenges with a determined mind these days. I'm inclined to believe I would, but it's not a question that can ever truly be answered. What I can say is that I've become increasingly annoyed with games making their next step forward too obvious. I personally found Metroid Dread way too easy to figure out, since at almost every point, you're given a teleporter which spits you out exactly where you need it to be. It sort of bummed me out. I was looking forward to exploring every inch of the map and getting a little bit lost. What better satisfaction is there than finally discovering a new area when you've been scouring the world for an hour? Having a progression like this usually means that your adventure feels less suffocating. Since the onus is on the player to figure out where to go, it means that there's a little more freedom when exploring as an adult. You might not even catch this on a first playthrough, but there's nothing stopping you from going straight to the Fire Temple and completing it before the Forest Temple. The bow is only required to unlock the dungeon map, which isn't necessary for completion. Though you could also do the Fire Temple near the end, since the Megaton Hammer isn't required to complete any other dungeon. It's hard to say if any of this was even intentional. There even being an eye switch in the Fire Temple implies the developers wanted you to have the bow before you went there. There are also actual impossibilities, like the Shadow Temple being locked behind the acquisition of the Forest, Fire, and Water medallions. But then, does it even actually matter if this stuff was intentional or not? I think in discussions of game design, or really any work of art, we place a great emphasis on what the developers wanted to do, which is fine, I do it all the time. The directive of the creators is important to consider. However, I don't think it should be the end-all be-all. Consider this, you can complete the Water Temple first without entering any of the other dungeons by warping out while the water is on the second level and hookshotting at a precise angle. From there, you perform a relatively simple jump to the level 3 water panel, and you're able to skip using a small key. Now, I'm fully aware that all your bullshit alerts went off just now. That's a glitch, right? You weren't meant to do that. Yeah, probably not. Does that mean we can't, say, enjoy those glitches on the same level as intended mechanics? Because they weren't meant to be there? It's funny, when there are game-breaking glitches, bugs which get in the way of progression, we're quick to label a game bad due to their existence. Yet when the tables are flipped, when speedrunners discover tricks or glitches which open games up and make them more fun to play, suddenly we aren't allowed to reference them when we talk about how much we like them. It's a conflict I face all too often writing about the games I like. I feel this pressure to discount glitches and tricks that are genuinely cool. Those days are behind me. I don't care anymore. Ocarina of Time is one of the most fun Zelda games to replay because of how broken it is. Did you know you can complete the Spirit Temple before any other dungeon? Normally, you'd need the Longshot, Lens of Truth, and Prelude of Light. You'd probably then think, okay, so you have to do the Forest Temple, Water Temple, and the Bottom of the Well before the Spirit Temple. Well, you don't actually need any of those things. The Prelude of Light isn't necessary for anything, since a simple save and reset will place Link at the Temple of Time as an adult and Kokiri Forest as a kid. That means you won't need to finish the Forest Temple. Either the Longshot or Hover Boots are required to cross the quicksand gap in the wasteland, but neither of them are required if you simply backwalk over it, which takes the Water Temple out. That means you only need the lens from the Bottom of the Well, though you actually don't if you memorize the path through the wasteland, which is entirely possible. There's nothing stopping the player from memorizing the path the ghost takes through repeated playthroughs and mimicking it. Eventually, you'll learn where the triggers are and how to avoid them, which means it is possible to do the Spirit Temple before any other adult dungeon. The only thing separating the progression tricks in Ocarina of Time from the ones in Breath of the Wild is, quite literally, developer intent. The reality is that both games allow for a fairly open progression that make them both fun to replay, intentional or otherwise. Playing it so much has actually made me discover a part of myself who maybe enjoys the days where games were a little less polished to a mirror sheen. Don't take that the wrong way. There are obviously benefits to modern gaming. Games are much more consistently able to execute on their full visions, unencumbered by underpowered technology. I won't deny the beauty of that, but I also can't bring myself to think any less of Ocarina for being as broken as it is. I suppose I find it kind of charming, a mark of the era, if you will. Now, brace yourselves. I'm about to take this line of reasoning to its logical next step. I've argued in the past that fan work is the future of a vibrant games industry. Be that independent developers, ROM hackers, modders, anyone who fits that description. It's why we'll always consider AM2R a Metroid game, no matter how many people it upsets. Lately, I've been thinking, where does that leave mods, hacks, or fan-created ports? Where do we include something like Ship of Harkinian in this discussion, a fan-made PC port with reverse-engineered code? It supports widescreen, an uncapped frame rate, gyro aiming, debug tools. It even has a built-in randomizer. And all you need is your own copy of the game. Is Ship of Harkinian a valid base with which to discuss Ocarina of Time in a modern context, or are we only allowed to consider the original 1.0 release? In regards to its place in history and its influence, it wouldn't make much sense. But for contemporary discussion, the here and now, its enduring legacy, well, like it or not, what Ocarina of Time even is has evolved. I played the 3DS remake before I played the N64 version, and I'm sure that's the case for many others as well. We've reached a point now where there are likely people playing Ship of Harkinian who have never even touched Ocarina of Time, or people who have watched someone else stream it on Twitch and experienced it that way. Should Master Quest be included in the discussion, as it was only introduced in the GameCube re-release? If we're willing to consider the PC port as a valid release, perhaps the randomizer feature is something we can consider a mirror mode, hero mode, or Master Quest equivalent. After all, if Ship of Harkinian was on the Nintendo Switch, everyone would be fine to consider the randomizer as such. I bring this up because Ocarina's randomizer is very important to me, and it's one of the reasons I've been able to appreciate the base game so much more. See, most Zelda games are fun, but they're usually the most fun on your first playthrough. That's when you don't really know anything, so every move you make is a discovery of some kind. Some Zelda games are fun to replay, but you're never going to get that first-time experience back. It's one of the weaknesses of how early 3D Zelda was envisioned. I think the water temple is expertly designed. It forces you to think about its layout, how the water levels open and close pathways, and it's very easy to get lost. However, after you've solved it once, you're likely not going to struggle when you play it again. This is what makes the randomizer so revolutionary. It breathes life back into the ordinary. You have the ability to shuffle the locations of every item. Suddenly, all of the keys in the water temple might be switched, meaning you'll need to solve it in an entirely different way. Except the long shot isn't guaranteed to appear in the water temple, so before you can finish it, you'll need to find the long shot, which can be anywhere. What you've done is turn the whole game into a dungeon, one with a different solution every time. Suddenly, the suspense from opening a chest is back. The wonder and intrigue upon entering a dungeon is back. Hence why I've played Ocarina so many damn times. There are an endless amount of settings to tweak the experience. Randomize dungeon entrances, turn off dungeon keys, shuffle the grotto entrances, let items appear in the shops. You can also give Link any number of items at the start if you don't want to, say, go looking for the ocarina or the prelude of light. Tweaking these settings every once in a while can have a drastic impact on your overall experience, and ensures you'll almost never get bored of doing them. Running one of these every once in a while with some friends has also encouraged me to learn so many tricks I would otherwise have had no reason to learn casually. The only reason I can cross the wasteland without any of the required items so efficiently these days is because it would have given me the edge in a randomizer. It has a similar appeal to a roguelike, where you get different items in different orders each time. It will also teach you things you've probably never known about. Did you know you can use the hover boots in the Forest Temple to access secret areas without backtracking? Did you know that Bongo Bongo could be defeated with only a hook shot? These are situations you might find yourself in during a randomizer, forcing you to really think outside the box and consider all of your available options to progress forward. It also gives every single item check an increased level of importance. What before might have just been some rupees, a piece of heart, bomb refills, etc., can now be absolutely anything. It's fairly easy even on casual playthroughs to skip over heart pieces out of laziness because it simply isn't a hard enough journey to warrant having so many hearts in the first place. With a randomizer, every secret is precious, and you might even discover some that you've never known about. Did you know there was a Skulltula in Zora's Fountain hidden under a silver gauntlet rock? Your only reward for collecting all the Skulltula is a refillable 200 rupees, hardly worth going for considering how little money actually matters, especially that late in the game. However, if every Skulltula could have an important item, you'll learn all their locations pretty quickly. And if you put items in the shops with random prices, suddenly there's a value to money that was never quite there before. Almost every problem Ocarina suffers from is remedied by playing the randomizer, and whether or not we include this in discussions of the game, there is no doubt in my mind that playing the randomizer has ultimately improved my appreciation for the vanilla game. It's probably done so for a lot of people. Much like Link awakening to a ruined future, there's no going back and flipping that switch. I like the game a hell of a lot more than I did before the existence of the randomizer. That shouldn't even be a surprise. After all, growth is simply natural. Ocarina of Time has most certainly grown. In the late 90s, the game must have felt like magic. Your starting area, Kokiri Forest, has an almost dreamlike quality to it, filled with children who never age, consigned to a forest hidden away from the rest of the world, who all have magical fairy companions protected by a giant talking tree. No area feels one and done. Everywhere you end up is somewhere memorable and rich with stuff to learn. Kakariko Village initially seems like a quaint little town. You help the Cucco lady gather her lost cuccos, piss off the windmill guy, maybe go on Dompe's grave-digging tour. It's all fun and games until you travel underground, where Hyrule's secrets are laid to bare. All manner of evil creatures live in the well. Skulltula, Gibdos, Lyklakes, Dead Hands. It is an extremely unpleasant place, as are all the graves behind the town. But none are as disturbing as the Shadow Temple. Here is gathered Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. Guillotines, redeads, Gibdos, Dead Hands, spike traps, death pits. You can intuit a lot about this place by putting the pieces together. At one point, Hyrule had a civil war in which one kingdom won out and unified. The Sheikah tribe were responsible for building this torture chamber. For what means? One can only guess. If you don't look too far past the surface level, all you see here is a spooky temple. It's why you need the Mask of Truth to see the whole picture. If you're not looking at everything for what it truly is, you may as well be blind. It's said that the temples are all connected to the sacred realm, and that Ganondorf used it to pollute each one with evil. He sends Phantom Ganon to the Forest Temple. He resurrects Volvagia to trap the Gorons. He sends Morpha to drain the water in Lake Hylia and freeze Zora's domain. His influence is felt everywhere, but the Shadow Temple? He didn't need to do anything, because the Kingdom of Hyrule had done enough. Bongo Bongo was sealed in the bottom of the well by Impa, and it hides away in the Shadow Temple when it escapes. I don't think it's even a question that Ganondorf is evil, but I do often wonder, where did that hatred come from? And when you look at places like the Shadow Temple, or how the Gerudo are closed off from the rest of the kingdom, it paints a less than pleasant picture of the current royalty. Ganondorf was not necessarily right to take over the kingdom and ruin it, but I think it builds an understandable motivation for him to be angry at the world and soak in its evils. I think this is part of why Ocarina sticks in our minds. So much of it is still a mystery. Most of what we know about the Shadow Temple is hidden in context clues and little snippets from the Hyrule Historia. We don't quite know the origins of the Poe sisters, or what most of the temples were built for. The Zora claim the Water Temple was built to worship the water spirits, but is the presence of Dark Link a result of them, or a result of Ganondorf? In a way, I think it's sort of beautiful that we might never know the full answers to these questions. We can still speculate about them to this day, giving it a life far beyond itself. And it makes exploring these temples feel even more foreboding. What do you think about wandering the hallways of the Forest Temple, listening to that haunting track? The mystery, the spooky music, the low-poly, dark look of the N64, it all swirls together to craft something truly unforgettable, an adventure that builds out the world and the threat of Ganondorf. At the same time, in the current year, that magic has waned considerably. We know how to manipulate the game's code to give us any item we want, or teleport us wherever we want. We all know exactly where to go and when, how to bypass item requirements where every event is triggered. We have an understanding of Ocarina of Time now that is better than the people who gave it to us. Yet is it not the mark of a truly fascinating piece that it elicits such curiosity in all of us? That so many different people cared enough to figure all of this out? That so many people still consider it one of the best video games ever made? Ocarina's legacy is defined by so much more than mere nostalgia. It is a story of growth so staggering that it transcends the boundaries of time itself. Time will continue to move, and Ocarina will move with it. As I grow older, I'm beginning to realize that many of my favorite video games probably had a nightmarish development cycle. To give us legendary video games, the people who made them had to suffer. Not only that, but without their suffering, the games we got may not have been so bold. Is that to be celebrated or lambasted? It's a question I struggle with in an age where working conditions are horrible and developers speak out about crunch culture. One could argue that it all feels like ancient history, and maybe it is. Nevertheless, the circumstances of Majora's Mask's development are almost unable to be divorced from the final product. Link has grown, Navi has left him, and he's completely alone in an unfamiliar new world. He may have confronted and defeated the evils plaguing him, but where does that leave him? What does it truly mean to grow up? What's left for us at the end of it all? A lot of heroes' journeys leave us with a warm, bubbly feeling inside. We've conquered evil, gotten past our insecurities, and it's happily ever after. That's certainly the feeling you get with everyone dancing at Lon Lon Ranch, rejoicing at the demise of Ganondorf. Very few stories have the courage to ask, what happens next? Where does it all end? What are we supposed to do in the meantime? In the face of our inevitable demise, is there any meaning in what we choose to make of ourselves? Aonuma attributed the name Termina to a place where people come and go, like a terminal. It's a place where ideas are exchanged and energies mix, though I can't help but fixate on the other meaning of the word terminal, situated at the end of something. In this colorful land of festivals and minigames, darkness looms. It isn't hidden like you'd expect. It hangs over everyone, plain as the night sky. All you have to do is look up. The moon is terrifying. It's not a symbol you can attribute malice to. It simply is. It will crash into Termina and kill everyone. There's no escaping it. Whether you're smack dab in the middle of Clocktown or far off in the depths of the Great Bay Temple, the end is coming for everyone. Some of us run from it. Some of us embrace it. Some of us don't even notice. Nevertheless, it is indifferent to how we feel about it. The end is nigh, and each of Termina's residents are faced with the question of, what do we do? Some of us devote ourselves to our work, finding value in what we bring to this world. Some of us put on a brave and powerful front, telling everyone we don't care, while we cower in fear when no one's looking. Some of us bicker over the smallest of things, arguing away the little time we have left. Some of us are too wrapped up in the embrace of another to pay the end any mind. There is no right or wrong answer. What's the point, then? Why do anything at all if it's fated to be erased? Fittingly, this is a question Majora asks the player directly by giving them the ability to turn back time. From a certain point of view, everything you do here is meaningless. No matter who you help, that progress is fated to be undone. It is impossible to help everyone in a single loop. So why bother? This is the reasoning that a lot of people use to dismiss it outright. For many people, that loop is extremely frustrating. It's hard to blame them. Like the moon, Majora's Mask is completely unconcerned with player happiness. You're going to have to learn each character's schedule and follow the beat of their drum. If you don't make it to Icona Canyon to meet Kafei, all of the work you put into that side quest ends then and there. You have to start again from the top. If you're stuck in the Stone Tower Temple, desperately searching for that last stray fairy, the moon isn't going to stop to let you finish. You might not even be able to see it, but you can feel it. The earth vibrates around you, the clock keeps ticking, and the music beckons to it. There's a unique despair to Majora's Mask's time travel. Time traveling for the first time was a bit intimidating in Ocarina, but it came with a more physically capable body and a wider range of tools. The world may have gotten scarier, but you were better equipped to deal with that harsher future. Majora gives you a lot of tools. You can skip forward several hours into the future, slow the flow of time down to a crawl, or reset back to the first day. But this control you have over time only allows you to manage its flow. That control only extends so far. If you're late to meet a character or fail to finish something, you aren't allowed to rewind a few hours back. You can only ever start back at the beginning. On my recent playthrough, I failed the Romani Ranch invasion several times, which is a side quest that involves several days of buildup. Each time I failed, I felt this anger welling up inside me that I hadn't felt playing a game in quite a while. All that preparation down the drain, forced right back to the starting line. Majora lets you wallow in that negativity for a while. You'll feel despair, frustration, sorrow. At times, you might even question why you're doing any of this at all. This isn't fun, it isn't productive, and it's causing me pain. Why am I doing this? It took 4 years to develop Ocarina of Time, and it was clear Nintendo wanted to get a little more mileage out of what they had created. Led by Eiji Aonuma, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Yoshiaki Koizumi, Majora's Mask would be made in about a year. Ocarina sold 7 million units, which was a colossal success, and the team expressed confusion as to how they wanted to move forward with a sequel to such a smash hit. Not only was this team under pressure, they were under a massive time crunch. The moon was inspired by a North Korean missile, which sailed past the country and almost made impact while the members of the team attended a wedding. It's almost impossible to separate Majora from the atmosphere it was made under. It's, at least in part, a product of the stress and anguish of those who made it. In other words, we enjoy Majora's Mask at the expense of those who gave it to us. In our current landscape, crunch is looked down upon more than ever. It's a massive problem in the games industry that's probably always been around, but never widely discussed. And so it feels a little weird to look back at Majora's Mask and applaud Nintendo for churning this out in a year. I watch characters like the postman freaking out about the end of the world, or the townspeople arguing about whether they're going to stay and continue the festival, or flee and be with their loved ones, and I can't help but think to myself, was this what the devs were thinking? Some of the Carpenter dialogue was actually meant to reflect what they were thinking, whether they'd be up all night working, or wondering if it'll be ready in time. Even the game's most iconic line, "You've met with a terrible fate," was meant to reflect how much pressure the devs felt to deliver a functional final product by this seemingly impossible deadline. They used their co-worker's wedding to come up with the story for Anju and Cafe. Even off the clock, their minds needed to be at work, or they wouldn't finish in time. Despite there not really being anyone above me setting deadlines, I often find myself in a similar headspace. It's not uncommon for me to work on a script all day and all night, forgetting to eat or sleep. When I get on a roll editing, I find it hard to stop. There are times where my body will be at a family gathering, and my mind will be somewhere else entirely, trying to think up ideas for the next video, or desperately trying to figure out how I want to say something. Especially when I find myself backed into a corner, there's a real pressure for me to break through the brick wall and get something down on the page. Writing is my passion, but it's also my job, and that cross-contamination can be poisonous for even the best of us. As someone who has recently found themselves in a bit of a slump, with my mind constantly racing about things outside of my control that terrify me to no end, I have to admit, reading the dialogue from the townsfolk was extremely painful. Trying to solve their problems felt like trying to solve my own, and I had to stop myself from looking up at the sky or just staring at that clock, watching the numbers tick down. The majority of my play sessions were, quite frankly, miserable. In general, Majora's Mask is the 3D Zelda I'm the least familiar with. There were so many things I'd forgotten about character schedules, heart piece locations, and dungeon layouts. Coming right off my Ocarina 100% playthrough, which I was able to finish in a swift 10 hours, I felt like a lost puppy in Termina. I had to retry Anju and Cafe several times. I kept missing important events, being forced to look up a bunch of stuff online. Usually, I hate looking stuff up, but I also didn't want to take too long making this video. I already had to basically rewrite massive chunks of it after feeling unsatisfied with what I had already spent months working on. The less I upload, the less people care about me, the less the algorithm cares about me, the less I'm able to grow, the less secure I'm going to feel about the channel's future, and thus, my own. I can't waste time. I need to move. It doesn't matter if I have no idea what videos I'm going to make next. I'll just have to make something, which is actually how my Donkey Kong Country 2 video turned out. I needed a video, that one seemed like a good idea, and I wrote it in an extremely short time frame. Looking at it next to my DKC1 video, which took me months to write, I really do regret putting out that video on the sequel when it felt like I had much less to even say about it. But I can't dwell on stuff like that for very long, can I? It can't matter that I have no idea how to structure this next video. It won't matter that I've been staring at a blank page for hours. If I don't distract myself, my mind is going to wander again. I can't think about the fact that one of the world's nuclear powers is threatening to blow everyone up. I can't think about the fact that the global water level is rising past the point of no return, and nobody on planet Earth seems to be fucking concerned about it. I can't think about the fact that at any moment a planet-killer meteor could crash into the Earth and eradicate us in an instant. I can't think about the fact that absolutely anything could go wrong in my body and end my life without me even knowing. If I let my mind wander for even a moment, I'll be dragged right back down into the pits of despair. I have to keep playing. I have to keep writing. I have to keep going. After all, if they could make Majora's Mask in a year, why can't I write a single fucking video? You'd be mistaken for thinking Majora's Mask is about despair. That's what you're presented with for the majority of your time here. A couple kept separated by the strands of fate. A poisonous swamp sucking the life out of the earth. A young guitarist's life snuffed out forever. It's easy to lose sight of yourself when your victories are so fleeting. It's always on to the next task, with very little time to appreciate what you've given to this world. But it's those small, brief victories that keep us going. Letting the postman carry out his final delivery. Giving Lulu her voice back, saving Romani Ranch, reuniting Anju and Cafe. Those moments stick with you, a constant reminder of why you have to keep going. While it's true that success is fleeting, so too is failure. Tomorrow is always a new day. Yeah, there were times where I wanted to bang my head against the wall, but then there were times I couldn't stop playing. There might only be 4 of them, but the dungeons are all excellent. Each of them use your mask transformations to their fullest, and have central mechanics that require you to consider the layout of the whole dungeon. Snowhead Temple has the central pillars, Great Bay Temple has the colored water pipes, and Stone Tower Temple has the gravity manipulation. Not only was the way forward never obvious, the stray fairies were devilishly hidden to give each room an added observational challenge. The transformation masks carry with them so much more than a normal item. You get to literally become the Goron hero or the Zora guitarist. Their lives may have been cut short, but you were able to heal them and ease their pain. They were able to pass on without regrets, knowing that someone would be there to carry on their will and finish what they couldn't. You have the powerful strength of Darmani behind you, able to roll across terrain faster than Epona and travel through lava with ease. That strength allows you to push down switches and move large objects. The Zora mask lets you swim through the water effortlessly, as well as walk along the seafloor. There are even boomerangs built in for good measure. In one respect, it might be kind of boring that each dungeon item revolves around the bow, but the transformation masks make up for that by being several items in one. By combining them like this, it's rare for the transformations to feel useless. The Great Bay Temple is as much about the Zora mask as it is about the ice arrows. That's part of why the dungeons feel so memorable too. They each reflect a region of Termina, which each have their own struggles. Defeating the boss also heals the area you're in, opening up new possibilities. Defeating Odalwa removes the toxins from the swamp, and you're able to save the monkey from being roasted alive. Defeating Gyorg clears up the murky waters of the Great Bay, and also gives Lulu her voice back. Majora's Mask runs the full gamut. It can be annoying, frustrating even, but it's also got some of the most fun challenges in a Zelda game. Where its dungeon count might be low, there are loads of mini-dungeons dotted across the land. Icona Castle, the Pirate's Fortress, the Deku Palace. All of them are fun to complete and make each of the 4 major areas even more distinct. Its side content, while occasionally confusing and strict, has some of the most fulfilling stories in any Zelda game. No matter how arduous it is to reunite Anju and Kafei, I do it every single time I play Majora's Mask, because seeing them together at the end of it all, happy to simply be wed before they're wiped off the face of the earth, it fills me with strength no matter how many times I see it. Really, that's why Majora works so well. Instead of the adventure being about despair, it's about the hope you feel when you're at your lowest point. We've all been there, at our wits' end, swamped with God knows how many worries, stressors, seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It's easy to give in, but Majora's Mask reminds us that hope burns ever brighter the taller the darkness looms. The ending is ultimately a happy one. There were so many horrors along the way in this twisted kingdom, so many people unhappy, so many stories left unresolved. But what matters is that in the end, you never gave in. To some, it may seem naive to hope. In fact, I think it's naive to hope. There's a part of me that doesn't want to hang on, knows that it's no different from gambling. Hope doesn't mean jack shit, but when the sky is falling, when we have to face our own powerlessness, stare into its welcoming embrace, like it or not, hope is all we truly have. It's what keeps us sane. It's probably what kept the devs sane through the sleepless nights at their computers, toiling away on a game they had no time to reconsider. I'm sure they gave in to despair plenty of times, but they also had the strength to see it through to the end. Not only that, what they created in such a short time is one of the most incredible experiences I will ever have with this medium. A shining example of what games are capable of, one that will stick in our hearts and minds forever. Yeah, it's not great that their health suffered. I don't think they should have been made to lose so much of their lives to this. Nevertheless, the past is the past, and this is what we're left with. All we can do is encourage safer working conditions for the future and continue to appreciate the work that they left us with. A painful piece, one that looks death straight in the face and dares to smile. When is it we can say we've matured? It's easy to place ourselves on a scale and say that we are more mature than we once were, but when does that process conclude? Does it conclude? I wonder if some of you are thinking that I've matured, that I'm about to reveal to you that I was wrong to be so harsh on The Wind Waker, and that I've secretly come around on it. I feel as though some people get the impression that I hate The Wind Waker. It is indeed one of my least favorite Zelda games. I think it tried to bite off way more than it could chew, and left us with a bit of a middling half-step towards something that would be achieved with much more gusto in the far, far future. To say I hate it, though, would be treating this like a zero-sum game. After all, some of them are going to sit at the bottom. A few of them have to. That's how relativity works. I have a lot of appreciation for The Wind Waker and acknowledge many of its unique strengths. One of the reasons I love Zelda so much is that almost all of them appeal to me and my interests on a basic level. The Wind Waker might not be my favorite, but it's easy for me to see why it might be someone else's. We might not always make the half-court shot, but we sort of have to admire the balls to shoot that far to begin with. There's a boundless ocean here. Get in your boat and sail the high seas. Where you end up is for you to decide. There are 49 quadrants, each with an island and various other secrets to discover. It's able to sell this fantasy primarily in its aesthetic elements. I'd argue it still has the strongest artistic cohesion of any Zelda. It's safe to say that what was initially one of its greatest weaknesses has slowly morphed into one of its greatest strengths. Returning to the GameCube version, I'm astonished by how gorgeous it still is. The cell shading gives everything a vibrant, bouncy feel. We've gone from one of the most unsettling Zeldas to one of the most welcoming. Traditionally scary enemies like Redeads have been given a more cartoony appearance. The music is more upbeat and cheerful, and there are tons of genuinely funny moments to reset the tone of the story. Hints of a darker tone remain, embodied by characters like Ganondorf and the King of Red Lions, but above the water, it's a simpler tale of a young boy searching for his lost sister. We see the adventure through those innocent eyes. No time travel forcing us to grow up, nor a dark future looming on the horizon. All of that is a distant memory, sunken beneath the seas. Sailing the seas is exciting. You can almost feel the wind pass you by, denoted by the white lines trailing through the sky. The sea feels alive, teeming with sharks, octopi, peahats. Sometimes the sea is calm, sometimes it's bumpy, and sometimes you get caught up in the storm. Its day-night cycle shines brighter on the seas than it ever has, adventurous by day and calming by night. The time you spend sailing the seas makes every discovery all the more worthwhile. Filling your sea chart in square by square is a fulfilling process, and it's exciting to look at the full map by the end of it all, riddled with red circles where you've hauled up sunken treasures. I especially love cross-referencing treasure charts with your own sea chart to try to figure out where the X is pointing to. There's almost always something new to find when you set sail, and it helps fuel the pirate-esque flavor. Unfortunately, it's hard to look at this as anything but a flavor. Most of what you end up finding are rupees, a resource with an artificially inflated level of importance via a monotonous and unnecessary required endgame quest. Everything else is next to useless outside of getting a few heart pieces, so you'll often find yourself digging up a chest and finding nothing. I suppose that's part of the pirate life, eh? Not everything you dig up is going to rock your world, and perhaps it was necessary in order to keep the value of the really good treasures high. A bigger issue is that the Great Sea is not built to exist within the framework of a Metroidvania. It's not an open world. It's more or less built like all the old Zelda games. You go through a linear path of dungeons, retrieve their items, and use those items across the overworld to unlock more stuff. This is still what Ocarina built, even if it is masquerading as something else entirely. What that often means is that you'll come to an island, step foot on it, and realize there's nothing you can even do there. This happens so many times that it starts to become prudent to save it all for the very end. The hookshot, one of the last items you'll obtain, is used for so many secrets that you're almost shooting yourself in the foot trying to do stuff without it. Not to mention, that big rupee sink I mentioned, the Triforce quest, encompasses a bunch of random islands which have virtually no purpose outside of that required endgame quest. It's not as if you're encouraged to set out onto the seas and chart your own path. In fact, the opening is so restrictively linear that you're forced to go to Dragon Roost Cavern lest you incur the wrath of the King of Red Lions. For some reason, the required dungeon order is back in action in a game which desperately needed the return of a non-linear one. I suppose another trend Ocarina started is a more involved story, and the Wind Waker takes it to the next level with several events which need to happen in a specific order, forcing the rest of the adventure to follow suit. Since your every attempt to break free from this suffocating linearity is met with disappointment, you'll start to treat the Great Sea differently, as an oversized, fancy-looking overworld where you spend a hell of a lot of time doing nothing and finding nothing. Heart pieces are more valuable the more difficult the game, so when that's most of what you end up finding in the Wind Waker, one of the easiest entries, you start to wonder what the point of going after them even is, especially when they're hidden behind some of the absolute worst minigames and side quests the series has ever seen. The more I write about it, the easier it is to see why people assume I hate it. I say all of this with love, because I adore what the Wind Waker is trying to be, and there are times where it clicks into place. Hunting for the ghost ship is perfect. You have to look at the phases of the moon, cross-reference it with your ghost ship chart, find out how that corresponds with your own sea chart, and then find the ghost ship out on the seas somewhere. There are a lot of little mini-dungeons scattered across the seas that are fun to discover, as well as hidden alcoves on larger islands. I would say the spirit of exploration is still strong, it just falls wildly short of what it could have been. This was true for me back in 2017, before I played Breath of the Wild, and it's certainly true for me now, after playing Breath of the Wild. That game had to change so much about Zelda that in many ways, it ceased to resemble what so many of us considered the franchise to be. That was what it took to embody true freedom, and the Wind Waker was unwilling or perhaps unable to shed that DNA, which I think I would be more fine with if it executed that traditional Zelda feel in an extra satisfying fashion, but I don't really think it does. There's basically one dungeon I really enjoy here, The Wind Temple is great. The path forward is never obvious, it makes great use of many dungeon items, ferrying Makar through it all is fun, the boss is challenging with a memorable theme. It's unfortunate that the rest of the dungeons play it so safe, either having a painfully straightforward path or spitting you back out where you're supposed to go, turning it into a glorified hallway. I have gotten the question over the years, why do dungeons have to be so complicated? Which is, of course, simplifying the issue a bit. I clearly don't think straightforward progression is all bad, and not every dungeon needs to be confusing. These days I have a lot more appreciation for the Shadow Temple than I used to. It has fun room-to-room challenges and serves as a nice change of pace from the other dungeons. When I start asking for dungeons to be more confusing, it probably means that their simplicity is a hindrance in some way. In the case of the Wind Waker, there's usually not a lot going on in terms of stimulating puzzle design. The Tower of the Gods is very briefly about using the King of Red Lions to enter a few rooms, before it becomes a massive slog where you slowly guide statues around. It's relatively easy, so the combat and puzzles you solve here don't end up amounting to much. Shoot eye panels, avoid BMOS, maybe fight a Dark Nut or something. I feel like I'm on autopilot the whole way through. The Earth Temple's mirror puzzles are okay, but it feels more like a frustrating escort quest than it did for Makar. You're in a more enclosed space that doesn't take advantage of Medley's flight capabilities all too well, and you mostly use her to shine light on walls and statues. I suppose mirror shield puzzles have never been all too difficult, but the dungeons of the past which used it didn't make that part of its whole identity. There's a room in the Earth Temple with a bunch of statues you need to line up that feels so mind-numbingly simple that you spend less time thinking about what to do and more time very slowly pushing the blocks where they need to be. I suppose one solution could be to make the puzzles more interesting, asking you to do a lot more with the mechanic. However, a much easier way to make the dungeons more complex without changing any of the stuff you're asked to do in them is to make the path forward less obvious. Allow the player to access rooms that don't immediately lead somewhere, or make them backtrack every once in a while. The more options you give people, the more likely they are to have to think about the entire dungeon to make progress, like a mini Metroidvania. If the overworld and therefore the rest of the game can be structured like a Metroidvania, why can't the dungeons be as well? And again, I'm not entirely married to this idea of a dungeon. I'm not married to much of anything in Zelda. I'm actually open to the design structure of the two dungeon types that Breath of the Wild introduces, but as long as we're still talking about the Zelda dungeons which require keys and dungeon items to progress, they're probably going to have to do a lot more to stand out as anything other than boring distractions. It's difficult to talk about things like this without running into a potential disconnect, of course. Going back to Metroid Dread again, there were quite a lot of people who managed to get lost despite the game's best efforts. So much so that Mark Brown had to change his video title. The same is true of the Wind Waker's dungeons. Better yet, some people simply prefer knowing where to go and get frustrated when they find themselves lost. Clearly, dungeons are a huge deal either way. We might not always be able to agree on what makes them special, but what we can usually all agree on is that they are a very important aspect of the Zelda experience, and Ocarina set that trend in many ways. We can be very particular about them. Funny enough though, the randomizer ends up becoming a boon for the Wind Waker in the same way it was for Ocarina, but not for quite the same reasons. Ocarina is just small enough with so many glitches and tricks that a randomizer makes it more fun to speedrun. It's the opposite for the Wind Waker. I think there's a much more organic appeal to the randomizer, one that seems fairly obvious. If the rewards you find on the sea vary in their usefulness, progression is too straightforward, and dungeons lack the complexity which would make them stand out, why not randomize the items you get to solve all of that? Why not turn the Wind Waker into a scavenger hunt, giving more inherent value to the offshoot islands and minigames with the 49 sunken treasures? In a lot of ways, the randomizer is able to fulfill the title's true potential, embracing the freedom its approach should theoretically allow. It doesn't exactly make that initial playthrough any more exciting, but it does make it far, far more replayable. The randomizer's approach and how it contrasts the vanilla game feels like it mirrors the conflict of the story. Zelda stories are generally quite predictable. You play as Link, the chosen hero, who goes around collecting mystical objects, or in some cases people, collects the Master Sword and slays a great evil, as was often foretold by some prophecy. Zelda is very fond of its staples, and though there are obvious exceptions, the majority of them cover a lot of the same ground. It's a comfortable groove that clearly works no matter how many times it's retold. On the surface, this entry is seemingly no different. Stories are told of the hero of time who vanquished Ganondorf, yet vanished before the land could be saved from his tyranny. Thus did Hyrule fall, persisting through the legends passed down to their descendants. In other words, though there are slivers of tradition that remain, dressing young boys in the garb of the hero, this is not Hyrule. That land perished long ago. This is a new land, with new gods, new customs, and new dreams. The Zora have evolved to take flight, now delivering letters across the disparate islands. The Kokiri have become one with the forest, more closely resembling their great Deku Tree. Between these islands is a vast stretch of water, teeming with possibilities. None of this has anything to do with history or prophecy at the outset. It's simply a boy searching for his sister and a group of pirates who see fit to help him do that. As we soon learn, those pirates are descendants of the royal line. Tetra is actually Princess Zelda, and the only reason Errol is kidnapped is because Ganondorf is looking for young girls who might be Zelda. The King of Red Lions, a talking boat who helps you on your adventure, is revealed to be the King of Hyrule. For you see, Hyrule stirs beneath the ocean. Its evils still plague the world and threaten to suck everything in with it. So, as the legend tells, a brave boy clad in green must rise up and defeat that evil. Your first steps into Hyrule are chilling. Time stands still, color has been drained from the land, and no music plays. This doesn't resemble the vibrancy of the surface in the slightest. It's cold, dead, a casket filled with long-forgotten souls. These depressing ruins are what we continue to fight over. There's a visible resistance to conformity in the Wind Waker. Link doesn't want anything to do with the tried-and-true green tunic, nor is he necessarily in it to save the world. He's here for his sister, and taking up the quest to defeat Ganon feels more like a way to pay back the King of Red Lions for helping out. Link, and by extension Tetra, are not in it because they are 2/3 of the Triforce. Tetra, the confident pirate captain, loses almost all of her personality and drive when she finds out that she's Zelda. The King of Red Lions wants to keep her locked away, while Link takes care of the rest. But it is so obvious that this goes against everything about her character. By the time you're confronting Ganondorf, she's sure as hell gonna fight with you. It's hard not to see this in a different light after reading what Aonuma had to say about the direction of the series by this point. Before The Wind Waker, Nintendo had the team make a realistic showcase for the tech, a demonstration Aonuma wasn't a big fan of. For him, it didn't feel like Zelda at all. One would assume, then, that the direction he took was what he ultimately preferred. I am admittedly unsure how much involvement he had with its script, but it seems almost too coincidental to me that The Wind Waker's central conflict centers around tradition. Is it proper to uphold it? What are the consequences of doing so? Ultimately, while it doesn't outright vilify the King of Red Lions, he was at least partly complicit in dragging these children into his mess. It's why I think he ends up forsaking tradition in favor of allowing Hyrule, and everything that came from it, to sink beneath the ocean. Maybe part of him realized that to yearn for the past, to try to instill those values into the children of a new generation, robbing them of the ability to choose their own future, he would have been no better than Ganondorf. I find there to be many expectations about what a Zelda game should be. At some point, it feels like we're basically asking every one of them to be the same thing, and it's no surprise that what we eventually got was a series that kept doing the same thing. The Wind Waker was one of the freshest steps outside of that typical model, proof that Ocarina's foundation may not have been quite so rigid, and it was met with a staggering degree of rejection. I don't blame people for wanting that either. Ocarina of Time set the stage for realistic fantasy, and here we are frolicking in the realm of Ghibli. Yet, history has been kind to the Wind Waker as more and more people look back on it with fondness. It's becoming increasingly more evident that they were right to move away from what was expected of them and follow their heart to whatever strange land it may have taken them to. It seems so silly to me that it was dismissed out of hand, but I suppose another phase of growth is to covet more mature experiences. Why spend time with this childish distraction when there's a whole new realm of edgier, more adult options that most of your friends are also interested in? The industry, and maybe even the devs, simply weren't ready for the kind of game the Wind Waker needed to be. It's one of the more sobering aspects of growing up. Sometimes, following your dreams doesn't quite pay off in the way that you'd hope. Sometimes people reject you for the strangest reasons, ones that you can't entirely understand. Ultimately, though, the courage you display in taking those bold steps forward, well, they speak for themselves. Someone out there is bound to appreciate that. Part of me feels a little guilty for loving Twilight Princess as much as I do, knowing that the people making it probably weren't too gung-ho about it. We have no proof, of course, and they actually seemed pretty into making a sequel to Twilight Princess before it was sent to the Crossbow Training's Shadow Realm. All we really know is that the team were set to make a direct sequel to The Wind Waker, which was met with hesitation by Nintendo of America, who could see that the style wasn't resonating with Western fans. Though it was Aonuma who approached Miyamoto to change course, I can't help but think back to his opinion on that tech demo. He didn't seem too keen on pursuing that direction, and so it seems to me that he bit the bullet for the sake of a commercially successful video game. But hey, I suppose whether or not they wanted to, Twilight Princess means a lot to me either way. For a long time, I considered it my favorite Zelda, and I still think I did a pretty good job explaining why in my ancient video. I suppose then what I want to talk about here is the role nostalgia plays in all this. Twilight Princess came out when I was 8 years old. It wasn't one of the first games I played, but it was one I played very often. I'd bring it over to my friend's house all the time and we'd play it for hours together, seeing what we could discover. I continued to play and replay it for years to come until I made that video in 2017. As you can imagine, it has a lot of nostalgic value to me. Perhaps that would cause a great number of you to look at what I have to say about it with hesitancy. After all, I might be blinded by those emotions. Maybe it causes me to be less harsh on it and play up the strengths it has. It's an interesting debate, because surely nostalgia does have an effect on how we feel about the things we love. Getting a warm, fuzzy feeling inside while you're playing something is probably going to color your perspective to some extent. While it's universally treated as a bad thing, I do wonder just how potent nostalgia really is. How far does its reach extend? And what claims are we really willing to make about the people who are nostalgic for them? That they're lying? That their opinion is invalid? We all have nostalgia for something. As long as time continues to pass, we will always be nostalgic for something. So it seems a little silly to me that we wage these nostalgia wars when everyone has it inside of them to some extent, and there's essentially no way to combat those feelings. There's no way to tell how poisoned your mind is, nor is it really possible to tell how much those expectations were instilled into you at a young age. Why do we like the things that we like? It's a difficult, borderline philosophical question to answer. I have a theory about my own tastes, and I think Twilight Princess is to blame. My favorite thing about it will always be its atmosphere. I have not forgotten a single area, village, field, or dungeon. They all have a unique shade of melancholy, like that feeling you get when you're still awake at 3 in the morning. Everything around you at a standstill, the music fairly laid back, a mix of comfort and dread. I am pretty sure this is where my love of the macabre started. It is the reason why I adore Dark Souls. It's why I could spend hours in Hollow Knight's Underground. It's why I will go on any adventure with Samus Aran. No matter how many times I go back to Twilight Princess, it always hits me exactly the same as it used to. Which means I'm nostalgia blind, right? Well, I don't know. I've played plenty of video games throughout my life, some of which I played before Twilight Princess that I simply do not like as much. I played The Wind Waker before it, and that's one of my least favorites, so clearly, one of these inherently appealed to me more than the other. I think The City in the Sky is the reason I'm obsessed with floating islands. It's not necessarily that I have nostalgia for the location. I've played the game so many times that a lot of that has kind of faded. It was simply that flying up to this place for the first time and taking it all in had a massive effect on me. The entire journey was like that. I couldn't go 2 feet without being hit with something cool. I still love how quaint the beginning is. Herding goats, playing with the village children, catching fish, and then you're suddenly thrust into Hyrule Castle, which has been plunged into this unreal dimension with surreal music and otherworldly creatures. Nothing is ever guaranteed. The state of the world shifts on a dime. You eventually settle into a rhythm. You run around Twilight environments as a wolf, collect tears of light, cleanse the land, and then complete the dungeon. But even within those constraints, there's stuff happening all the time. Colin gets kidnapped by King Bulblin, and an epic fight ensues between you two. At the end of the Lanayru Tears of Light segment, when you expect everything to be over, you instead fight a mini-boss. Once you get the 3 fused shadows, Zant steals them and critically injures Midna. It's interesting to me that a lot of people see the Tears of Light as filler content, even though every time you start to collect them, you're in a completely new part of the map. They're the lead up to the dungeon we've come to expect in these games. You're just doing it as Wolf Link. Admittedly, Wolf Link is not the most versatile fighter or anything, but I think it's fun trying to get around with this more limited toolset. What matters to me, anyway, is that if we're going to have such a suffocatingly linear progression, you have to make sure that the pacing is rock solid and that you're not spending too much time in between dungeons doing nothing. It's funny, despite having 5 pieces of heart to a container instead of 4, this game actually is one of the shortest and easiest to fully complete. It doesn't rely too much on bullshit minigames, nor does it have long, boring traversal. The map is about as big as it needs to be, there are just enough caves and alcoves to not overwhelm, with a ton of dungeons to explore. It flows almost as well as Ocarina, since it follows the most unashamedly in its footsteps. This title sets up an entire faction of invaders, led by Zant and Ganondorf, while also filling its version of Hyrule with lovable misfits who all end up being relevant in your fight against this threat. This may also be where my love of involved grand stories came from. Really though, I just think it's a joy to exist in this world. It might be drab, but I think that's exactly how they wanted it to feel. Quiet, bleak, depressing, which is certainly a hell of a way to follow up the Wind Waker. While I do think it's a step back from Ocarina in a few ways, I largely think it is a more direct evolution of it. An equal amount of focus was placed into the dungeon design to make each one stand out. One complaint levied towards Twilight Princess is that your items are not used very often outside of the dungeon you obtain them in, but I guess I've never seen that as an altogether bad thing. The Lakebed Temple has you using a bunch of different items: water bombs, the Zora Tunic, and the Claw Shot. The dungeon is there to make the absolute most out of those items before moving on to the next set, and even then, you do still use the Iron Boots fairly frequently. In fact, the late game dungeons have you using more of your arsenal than you'd probably expect. The City in the Sky still has unique uses for the Iron Boots, Bow, Gale Boomerang, Spinner, and the Claw Shot before you unlock the Double Claw Shot. It feels like there was a concerted effort, at least later on in the game, to make your tools multi-purpose. It leans into its linearity, taking advantage of the fact that every player will have the same set of items at all times. The only dungeon item I forgot about was the Ball and Chain, and even that one has some fun use cases in the Snow Peak Mansion, at the very least. I suppose I care much more about how each dungeon is designed individually, which means the amount of uses an item gets in said dungeon doesn't really matter to me. I care far more about how the Lakebed Temple forces you to think laterally to solve its shifting water level puzzles. It's reminiscent of Ocarina, but clearly an evolution of the concept, where here you need to spin a central bridge in 4 different directions to get the water flowing where you need it to. Like the Shadow Temple, the Temple of Time is a wholly linear track focused on room-to-room challenges, but the twist of the concept is that the midpoint of the dungeon has you controlling a statue and ferrying it backwards, clearing out all the obstacles that gave you trouble. Each dungeon has a unique mechanical feeling alongside a kick-ass theme. It is my opinion that this is the peak of Zelda's dungeon design and a culmination of everything the team had learned up to this point. They're a perfect blend of audiovisual theming, mechanical identity, and labyrinthine design. At this point in the series, I think it would be easy to see why the dungeons are so beloved. There isn't a lot else like them in other games. These highly curated labyrinths that feel like a cross between a puzzle box and a set piece, transporting you into a pocket dimension where you have to play by its rules. I think what completes the majesty of the Twilight Princess experience for me is the spectacle of it all. In between dungeons, there are a lot of exciting things happening, but they don't even come close to the stuff you end up doing in dungeons. With the exception of like the first 2, the end boss is almost always this larger-than-life monstrosity that you somehow need to take down. Morpheal is a perfect example of this. They make you slowly descend into its impossibly huge arena, juxtaposed by the wriggling little tentacle you see at its base resembling Morpha. Of course, this isn't all you're fighting. It squirms its head out of the sand, revealing many more tentacles and a giant mouth with razor-sharp teeth. The fight is about tracking down the eye through the various tentacles, grappling it to you, and then beating the hell out of it. They throw a few water bombs at you, pick you up and eat you with their tentacles, but it's nothing you haven't handled before. Until you reach the midpoint. Suddenly, you realize why the arena was so big. It needed to house this fucker. The fight shifts gears, and now it's about trying to keep up with this Goliath of a sea serpent and attach yourself to its eye, where you begin to down it Shadow of the Colossus style. The pace of the fight may have become more frantic, but the music is keeping up with you. The dynamic soundtrack is extremely underrated, as you bounce between its heightened Phase 2 theme and the triumphant strike its weak point stinger as you reach its eyeball. It really feels like you're trading blows with a titan, and hearing this when you finally fell it sends a surge of satisfaction straight to your brain. The weight they lend to this third temple boss is about on par with the scale of what a final boss would offer, and that's how most of the bosses feel. There's a first phase, which is usually pretty tame. You pass its puzzle, strike at its weak point, until you reach its second phase. This is where a twist occurs. The sand is drained out of Star-Lord's room, Argarok's armor falls off, or even the inverse, where Armagoma hangs on by a hair. At which point, the fight takes on a completely different feel. Whether it's spinning up the edge of a spiral cylinder, or claw-shotting high into the sky and smashing the boss back down to the ground, Twilight Princess rarely misses. It takes that energy into the endgame and sprints to the finish line. I have yet to see a Zelda game end as strongly as this one, and it feels like the apex of what this team had been building towards, the product of their immense growth. It's able to produce exactly the atmosphere required of it. The Palace of Twilight feels oppressively lonely, the vibe of the Twilight areas you previously visited, but also the wellspring of that energy. Simply existing here makes it all the more obvious why Midna was so entranced by the Realm of Light. Her world was built to be a prison for her people, after all. Zant rests at the end of all this, the foreboding menace who's thwarted you at nearly every step of the journey. You expect this Ganondorf-level presence, the Twilight Usurper, but instead, we get a mask-off moment that's always stuck with me. A lot of people view this as a surprise Ganondorf twist, which robs Zant of his spot as the primo villain, but I've never quite viewed it that way. While I generally would prefer Zelda to move away from Ganon and explore more original villains like Majora's Mask and Vati, I do still think Zant serves his role as main villain dutifully until the end, even if his role is one-upped by Ganondorf, learning of his true nature, that he's basically a jealous madman, a mere shadow of Ganondorf's burning rage. It makes for an even scarier encounter. This dark, twisted version of Aghanim is where they decide to do their boss rush. But instead of simply making you fight everything again for no reason, we get a Xantified version of every boss, complete with remixed music, harder mechanics, and an injection of the most unpredictable energy you could ever imagine. Seriously, the song is like 6 minutes long with 7 different phases, and you never know what's coming next. It's one of my favorite Zelda tracks, with each phase introducing a weird set of very loud, obnoxious distortions. Like Zant himself, the song keeps you guessing, until he presumably gets tired of dealing with you and throws everything away in a last-ditch effort to kill you. There are points at the end here where you cannot keep track of him. It might not be the creeping dread you've come to expect from all the build-up, but it does fit the unhinged terror of Majora's Mask. Makes you wonder if these two things are connected. What I love about this, though, is that even after defeating Zant, you're only about halfway through the endgame, and it isn't interested in letting off the gas. They throw so much at you. Midna donning the fused shadows and breaking the seal on Hyrule Castle, the Resistance banding together to help you one last time, your final match against King Bulblin, where he deems you stronger than anyone he has yet faced. All the while, you're in Hyrule Castle, yet another proper dungeon that maintains the somber tone you've come to expect. As you climb the tower portion, Ganon's influence grows louder and louder. Maybe it's a trick Ocarina pulled, arguably with more charm, but it's a trick that works nonetheless. He knows you're approaching, but he's content to wait for you. After all, he's not in any rush. What follows is probably still the most exhilarating finale of any game I've ever played. A 4-phase fight, each of them with their own unique theme. You contend with Phantom Zelda, a quaint yet traditional battle of energy tennis, before he throws off the gloves and immediately transforms into his Dark Beast form, which you naturally fight using your own Dark Beast form. A parallel I hadn't even drawn until writing this. When he gets tired of that form, he summons his iconic steed, and you team up with Zelda to take him down, as you help her aim the bow of light. Again, each phase has its own music, its own distinct feel, and it's all been building up to this final showdown. Once again, we circle back. This is the game that made me fall in love with duels. Well, it was either this or Revenge of the Sith. This image of a Twilight backdrop, Link and Ganondorf sizing each other up. We get a return of the dynamic boss theme, where this epic duel energy is intercut with a sudden jolt of adrenaline when your blades clash. It's not a particularly hard fight, nor is it really a particularly hard game, and yet the feelings it manages to instill within me are second to none. I will never be able to look at this as anything other than the coolest shit of all time. And yeah, maybe that is the nostalgia in me talking. It's impossible for me to know how much weight those memories have over me. Do I speak more highly of them because they were formative memories? Well, I'd like to posit an alternative theory. Perhaps Twilight Princess is just such an impressive game that out of the dozens of them I played as a child, it happened to be the one to almost single-handedly dictate what my tastes would be going forward. Ultimately, there has to be something inherent to it that made it feel so special to begin with. And perhaps those feelings were heightened by my relative lack of experience, but I had to draw upon that hype from somewhere, after all. I may harbor a suspicion that this is never what Aonuma or his team truly wanted. I don't know if I'll ever truly be rid of that assumption. Yet, it is still clearly the culmination of everything they had been building up to this point. Occasionally, when I'm making a video or looking back at a wildly successful one, I often wonder to myself how this is going to end up being the video to go viral. What do people see in this? I certainly feel that way about my older Zelda videos, which people still watch and enjoy. I wonder if Aonuma and his team think similarly about their older Zelda projects. At the end of the day, though, those opinions are simply out of their hands and mine. While I may never understand what people see in those old videos, the fact that people see something in them is undeniable. I cannot refute it, no matter how much I want to. Thus, the work speaks for itself. We like to think of growth as this straight line that only goes up, but in reality, there are almost always several dips on that path. In feeling out who you want to be, you're not always going to arrive at the correct answer. After all, one must experiment with all manner of different approaches before you're able to find the best one for you. Zelda is much the same. Each title, while reminiscent of what came before, always did something no one could have expected of it. Whether the audience approved of it or not, Zelda is not afraid to travel down the road less walked. As a result, it's often able to craft experiences we simply cannot get anywhere else. I say this all as a resident defender of Skyward Sword. I don't bear any ill will toward it. I think it offers up a few new exciting changes to the series that would even go on to influence Breath of the Wild, so it certainly wasn't an unnecessary step. but even I could admit that it seems confused. On paper, everything seems normal. This is the game which sits at the beginning of the Zelda timeline. There are more cutscenes here than there have ever been, headed up by a new writer who previously worked on the Oracle games Minish Cap and Phantom Hourglass. There are overworlds to explore, dungeons to find, items to collect, and bosses to fell, all of which are completed in a linear order. That is exactly what Skyward Sword seems to be, just another Zelda game. Dig a little deeper though, and you'll find quite possibly one of the most compromised titles in the franchise. There are only 3 major areas outside of the sky based on the 3 goddesses who created the world. There's a forest, a volcano, and a desert. Some variance is included within those biomes, like a lake, but for the most part, you're stuck visiting and revisiting 3 generic environments, which I suppose is par for the course with Zelda. It's not like I really expect much else, but the amount of time you spend in each area makes them feel even more bland. We've gone from one of the best paced Zeldas to one of the worst, which is aggravating because it seems like a priority was placed on making your moment-to-moment gameplay more engaging than it had ever been. To call these areas overworlds in the traditional sense feels a little disingenuous. These are areas with the same care put into their level design as you'd expect from the series' dungeons. There are platforming challenges to complete, enemies and mini-bosses to fight, all as a lead-up to that area's dungeon. These are areas chock full of stuff to find, outside of your usual range of rupees and heart pieces. You can find treasures to upgrade your items, or bugs to craft strong potions, some of which are hidden in secret rooms, making them a lot of fun to explore. I do stand by it having some of the worst pacing of any Zelda, but I can't deny that I get sucked into its gameplay loop every single time. No matter how much I hate revisiting the forest for the 3rd time and hunting for Tadtones, part of me has to admire just how many ideas they were able to cram into this title. It doesn't come together in a coherent way, yet I can tell the creative juices were flowing nonetheless, and that the team were starting to break away from the typical mold. Aonuma stated that he wanted to shatter the process they had developed for making these games after Twilight Princess, and gave director Hidemaru Fujibayashi free rein to change whatever he wanted about it. Essentially, they gave themselves a little more freedom to step outside of the box they had struggled within since the release of Ocarina of Time, in the hopes that they could once again create something with the impact that game once had. All that mattered was that the spirit of Zelda remained intact, a guiding philosophy I can wholeheartedly respect. What we ended up with here is more of a half step than a full dive. We may have gotten a radically different Zelda, but that mostly came down to its new control scheme. It was still a linear adventure Metroidvania sitting atop Ocarina's foundation. I think we take for granted how miraculous video games truly are, that so many talented developers are able to put their all into making something great. The idea that they're going to bat 100 every time is completely unrealistic. Skyward Sword is a rare, unapologetic showcase of them making experimental changes to see which of them ended up working. There were mixed results to this approach. Turning the overworld into an extension of the dungeons, having them be their own puzzles to solve, was a nice change. Other ideas, like the decision to make the sky into a Mario-esque overworld and turn the various areas into a glorified level select, maybe weren't so spectacular. This seems like it was tailor-made for me. A game that takes place above the clouds where you fly around on giant birds and explore sky islands like the Wind Waker. That's like my dream game. That's a game I want to make. This is not that game, not even close, because the sky isn't to be explored, it's a level select. There are maybe 1 or 2 interesting rocks, and the rest is completely barren. It makes the Wind Waker's Great Sea look magnificent by comparison. It actually begins to annoy me when I'm forced to explore the sky for goddess chests. Nevertheless, it's a consequence of the approach Aonuma and his team wanted to take with Zelda. I've always found this quote from him fascinating. I generally don't try to take into account the player's expectations of what they want from a Zelda game when making a new one. The reason for that is, players don't necessarily know what they want. We need to be able to surprise them. So where we put a lot of our focus is on creating these new experiences that are going to make the game feel fresh and different. I don't know if this was the intention, but this statement is displaying a lot of vulnerability. It's telling players that they don't want to conform. They'd instead like to chart their own rocky path in the hopes that what they end up making is able to give fans something they never knew they wanted. Of course, that mantra isn't always going to work, it's a risky proposition, and yet Isn't it true that the craziest ideas, the riskiest ones, are necessary to create truly unforgettable experiences? Perhaps that's why I'm less harsh on Skyward Sword. I appreciate how different it feels from the other 3D Zelda games. A lot of people don't like how everything feels like a puzzle, but I think it adds a fresh layer to your exploration. Combat has never quite been the series' strong suit, and I think Skyward Sword was the first significant step forward, if only for being much more challenging. Maybe it doesn't resemble what we traditionally expect from Zelda combat, feeling much more like a reaction-based puzzle, but I thought it made each encounter more interesting. That level select approach completely destroys the narrative pacing, but it also meant that I never quite knew what it was going to ask of me next. You can see the ideas that would eventually influence Breath of the Wild in their infancy here. Diving down into Elden Volcano, only to be thrown in prison with all of your items stolen and forced to re-explore the area in a severely weakened state. Were it not the third time we'd touched down in this region, I have a feeling people would have been more receptive to it. This did not happen in prior Zeldas. You had to have an overworld. That overworld needed to be structured like a Metroidvania. There could never be anything else going on. By adopting this level select structure, the developers were able to do things like make an explorable sand sea that you visit in both the past and the future. It can also backfire. I don't know a single person who enjoys searching for Tadtones. Experimentation isn't sexy. We tend to look at this and think to ourselves, wow, they were really running out of ideas for this one, which isn't wrong. Technically, they had run out of ways to make Ocarina's ideas continually fresh. I don't agree that them feeling out what a Zelda could be was a creatively bankrupt move, even if they clearly couldn't decide on how to make it all fit together within their development timeframe. So much of what's wrong with Skyward Sword, in my view, has more to do with the pressure they clearly felt to pad out its length. It feels like they came up with a story which couldn't possibly cover the amount of gameplay ideas they had. It feels like they didn't have enough areas, enemies, or bosses. It feels like it is literally bursting at the seams, held together by duct tape and glue. You can peer directly into its beating heart, your third time fighting the imprisoned. It's a really well-written skeleton of a story, one which seeks to explain the origins of the Master Sword, of the Triforce, of the cycles of reincarnation and destiny, and chiefly, of two dorky lovebirds. Link and Zelda have been given so much care and attention, Link's portrayal in particular probably being one of my favorites. Silent protagonists are often hard to work with, and I generally don't like them, but I enjoy when Zelda is able to give Link a little more personality. In my opinion, we're past the days of him being a link between the player and the game. He has clearly become a character in his own right, even if a lot of his characterization is still malleable. There are great moments peppered throughout, with Groose stealing his fair share of the limelight, but it's often difficult to appreciate that story when it moves at the speed of molasses. You reach a new area, you look for Zelda, it leads you to a dungeon, you don't meet up with her or she leaves, and then you return to the sky to find your next dungeon. Then, you get some actual information about how Zelda is in the past. Impa says you can go meet her, except before you do that, you need to power up the Master Sword, which you can only do by finding 3 of the Goddess Flames. So you go do all of that for a while, until you're finally able to speak with Zelda. You get a lore dump about how she's the reincarnation of Hylia, and that you forged the Master Sword in an effort to seal away Demise. At this point, all you have to do is confront him. But you also need to go find the Triforce, and the only way to do that is to speak to a being who has been around long enough to know where it's been hidden. You find him, fight him, rid him of Demise's corruption, and what does he tell you to do? To go to 3 major areas, speak with the sacred dragons, and have them assemble a song that will give you access to the Triforce. And so, when the game asks you to swim around looking for Tadtones, it does feel somewhat insulting. Yet the end of the journey hits all of the same beats you'd expect. The epic, multi-phase final fight against Demise and Girahim, who mirror Link and Fi. The music here is incredible. This will always be one of my favorite Zelda soundtracks. The fight against Demise lives rent-free in my head. It looks like the fucking final world from Kingdom Hearts, except Demise bends it to better fit his energy. It's a challenging fight with an incredible score, making great use of the finishing blow. The individual moments are all great, what you'd expect of Zelda at this point. They just can't fit within the constraints of a game that already can't fit its ideas into such a small surface area, which is a shame, since it means that some of the more interesting components don't get the time they deserve. I think it's cute that Link and Zelda are more romantically involved, giving you more of a motivation to search for her. That relationship isn't explored as anything other than a flavor, since the majority of Zelda's screen time is dedicated to her running away with Impa or delivering exposition. Fucking Groose gets more development than anyone else, which isn't entirely unwelcome. We all love him. It's just disappointing. It's tricky. I think Zelda stories are very important. Despite what I may have said in the past, I truly believe this series has a unique grasp on storytelling. Many of these games let their world design and mechanics tell their own stories. Ocarina and Majora through their time travel, The Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild through their takes on the post-apocalypse, Twilight Princess through its oppressive atmosphere. Exposition exists in all of these games to some extent, but most of them let their words and mechanics do the talking for them, which is why Skyward Sword feels a bit like a black sheep. Too often, the places you're exploring feel like video game levels, either due to the way they've been designed or the degree to which they've been rigidly delineated. I can't tell you many interesting things about two of its major provinces, nor would I really care to know. The Lanayru province is, of course, the exception, which does a much better job letting its mechanics do the heavy lifting. The time shift stones are a wonderful window into the past, telling some wonderful smaller stories, while still prompting so many questions about what happened here. How many years have passed? Who built these robots? The dungeons, a mining facility and a giant ship, are also much more thematically resonant than a bunch of scattered temples. Ultimately, there is a reason you're going to all these areas. Hylia built them all to have the hero of legend forge the Master Sword and seal away demise. It's just a very unexciting one, which renders the world a series of video game levels. I can't really blame anyone for looking at it as anything other than a mess, not fit to exist in the same sphere as the other Zeldas, but I think I and many others have come around on it in part because these days, it really does feel like the end of an era for 3D Zelda. It seems like it was actually the final time they would make a 3D Zelda like this. A 3D Zelda based on Ocarina of Time. It was the last time we'd see heavily curated puzzle box dungeons, which I'd argue are some of the strongest in the series. The Ancient Cistern is a fan favorite for a reason. It plays like a prototype divine beast in that there's a central mechanic you need to play with to progress. The Sand Ship has a similar structure, where you have to find ways to turn the ship forward and back in time, involving a lot of unorthodox thinking. These are ideas you're only allowed to act upon when you restrict the player in the way that classic 3D Zelda did. It's a lot more difficult to pull off when your goal is to give players as much freedom as humanly possible. For a lot of people, I think part of the disappointment in the Divine Beasts was due to the previous games having much longer, more challenging dungeons, which took up a much larger chunk of playtime. And I can't exactly blame people for missing that format. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with Zelda. But I think to a certain extent, an aspect of growing up is letting go, moving on. That's the impression I get from the people making Skyward Sword. This was the limit of what they could achieve with 3D Zelda. It was necessary to re-examine what the series could be in order to allow it to evolve, which doesn't suddenly make it this underrated masterpiece, but it does offer some much-needed perspective. I love the classic 3D Zelda games. I love them to death. I love their structure, their stories, their dungeons, pretty much everything about them. I always will. And somewhere deep down inside, I will always yearn for more. Yet, I also love Breath of the Wild. I love Tears of the Kingdom. I want the series to keep moving in that direction, and it seems like it will. Which is weird, because in a lot of ways, Breath of the Wild is like the antithesis of classic 3D Zelda. It may as well be labeling that old format outdated by comparison. Nevertheless, I am able to love them both, since I think it was the natural and necessary next step for healthy growth. With each passing day, I think I've grown with it. These days, I'm perfectly okay with leaving the old behind and fully embracing the new. The more I think about it, the more I'm content with what these 5 games offered me. I don't think I need anything more. And if I ever get that craving, there are talented developers across the industry willing to give me a similar experience wrapped in an entirely new package, not restrained by the confines of what a Zelda can or cannot do. I keep seeing a push for more traditional elements of Zelda to return. People want more traditional dungeons, a more involved story, stuff like that. I used to exist in that same camp, especially when Breath of the Wild first came out. A lot of what that game did felt like spitting in the face of what came before. And if you go back and watch that video, I was a little bitter about how much praise it was getting at the time. Ironically, I've done a complete 180. In a time where more and more people are expressing their disappointment that Breath of the Wild left so much behind, I'm even more glad that it kept barreling forward in a new direction, giving us all something we didn't even know we wanted. I want Zelda to keep doing that. More than simply a formula of game we get every 5 or so years, I want each new Zelda release to completely blow me away. I want Zelda to be a series that consistently makes my jaw hit the floor, trying things I never could have imagined. Ocarina of Time laid the foundation for a beautiful piece. That piece is complete. There is nothing left to add to it. It won't always feel good. The road will be a bit rocky, but growth is inevitable. Breath of the Wild was inevitable. Perhaps we should grow with it.